It began with a phone call no one ever forgets. A neighbor, shaken, whispering to the dispatcher, "Something's wrong here, something's terribly wrong." Within minutes, flashing lights cut through the darkness. An officer stepped into a scene that would defy every explanation. A home once filled with comfort and laughter now stood frozen in silence. And in that silence, the truth waited to be uncovered. Her name was Lily Stevens. She was 58 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had spent more than 3 decades inside the classrooms of Cedar Hill Elementary. To those who knew her best, she was more than an educator. She was a friend, a caretaker, a woman whose gentle laugh and unwavering kindness made her unforgettable. Parents trusted her with their children, neighbors leaned on her for advice, former students still wrote her letters, thanking her years later for believing in them when no one else did. Lily lived alone in a modest but well-kept brick home on Hawthorne Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac where the loudest sound most nights was the crickets in the trees. Cedar Hill, a town tucked away in Maryland's rolling countryside, prided itself on being the kind of place where people left doors unlocked, where every face on the street was familiar. It was a community built on trust, a trust that would soon be shattered in ways none of them could have imagined. The timeline of Lily's final day began like any other. Early in the afternoon, she drove her silver sedan to the local market. Surveillance footage later confirmed the details. Lily, her cart filled with groceries, chatting politely with the cashier, pausing to wave at a child tugging at his mother's sleeve in line. She appeared calm, content, as though she had no idea her every move was being marked in time. It would be the last recording of her alive. At precisely 7:52 p.m., a neighbor saw Lily pull into her driveway, carrying shopping bags inside. The porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow across her walkway. By 8:15, the faint sound of her television drifted across the yard, a familiar sign to her neighbors that she had settled in for the night. And then, something changed. At 9:30, the light went out. The house fell into complete darkness. For most, it was nothing unusual. For Lily, it was routine to retire early. But what no one realized at that moment was that the quiet darkness inside her home concealed more than just sleep. The next morning came with an eerie stillness. The newspaper lay untouched at the edge of her driveway. A close friend, who usually received Lily's cheerful morning phone call, heard nothing. By noon, unanswered calls had grown into worry. And by evening, Cedar Hill was about to learn that its carefully preserved peace had been shattered, that within the walls of Lily Stevens's home, something unimaginable had already unfolded. By the morning of September 13th, the town of Cedar Hill was stirring as usual. Children headed off to school, commuters filled the roads, and the world went on. But inside the small brick home on Hawthorne Drive, time had stopped. It was Lily's best friend, Margaret Collins, who first sensed something was wrong. Margaret and Lily spoke every morning without fail, a ritual they'd carried on for nearly 20 years. When calls went unanswered, Margaret tried again. Still silence. By mid-afternoon, her unease became undeniable. She walked across the street and knocked firmly on Lily's door. There was no response. The house looked ordinary from the outside, curtains drawn, mail neatly tucked into the box, the faint scent of lilies from her garden wafting across the yard. But to Margaret, something felt off. She called Lily's brother Daniel, who lived 2 towns over. Together, they reached out to local authorities. At 5:47 p.m., Cedar Hill police responded to a welfare check. What they found would forever stain the memory of this quiet town. According to official reports, officers arrived to find the front door locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry. A window in the kitchen was cracked open, though screens remained intact. Officers circled the perimeter, calling Lily's name, but the silence inside was heavy, oppressive. With Daniel's consent, they forced entry through the back door. The house was unnervingly tidy. Grocery bags from the night before sat half unpacked on the counter. A carton of milk had been placed in the refrigerator. A loaf of bread still rested in the bag. It was as though Lily had been interrupted mid-task. In the living room, a lamp stood toppled, its shade crooked. Nothing else seemed out of place. No broken glass, no signs of a struggle. It wasn't until officers entered the bedroom that the true horror revealed itself. There, lying across the bed, was Lily Stevens. Motionless. A thin line of blood stained the sheets. Her hands rested awkwardly at her sides, and her face, frozen in a look of confusion, suggested she never saw it coming. Investigators noted the absence of defensive wounds. Whatever happened that night had been swift, deliberate, and devastating. Forensic teams arrived within the hour. They began their methodical sweep. The time of death was estimated between 9:15 and 9:45 p.m., just after the lights in her home went out. The cause, a single deep wound to the chest, delivered with precision. The lack of defensive injuries raised an unsettling question: did Lily know her killer? Fingerprints were lifted from the kitchen counter, though most belonged to Lily herself. A partial print, smudged and incomplete, was discovered near the back door. A faint shoe print was lifted from the hardwood floor, size 11, uncommon for the neighborhood. But perhaps most baffling of all was what wasn't there: no sign of robbery, no valuables missing, no forced entry. In the living room, detectives found Lily's purse resting on a chair, her wallet untouched, cash still inside. Jewelry was undisturbed. Even the television remote sat neatly on the armrest. Whoever had entered her home wasn't searching for possessions. They had come for Lily. News of her death spread quickly. By nightfall, neighbors gathered outside the yellow-taped home, their faces etched with disbelief. "This doesn't happen here," one resident whispered to a reporter. "We don't even lock our doors." Former students flooded social media with messages of grief, recalling the teacher who had once been their guiding light. At the elementary school where Lily had taught, staff members clung to one another in shock. To them, Lily wasn't just another victim. She was family. For Daniel Stevens, the news was shattering. He later told investigators, "My sister trusted everyone. That was her way. She never saw the bad in people." His grief turned quickly to a desperate need for answers. How could someone enter her home, strike so suddenly, and vanish without a trace? Just as investigators began piecing together the timeline, they stumbled on something that complicated everything. In Lily's bedroom, tucked inside her nightstand drawer, was a letter, handwritten and addressed to no one. The note, dated just 2 weeks earlier, contained a chilling line: "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident." No explanation followed. No names were mentioned. Just that cryptic warning, scribbled in Lily's familiar handwriting. Detectives froze. Had Lily sensed danger? Had she known someone was watching her? Or had this letter been meant for someone else entirely? The discovery turned a straightforward case of murder into a puzzle of motives, secrets, and hidden truths. And for the people of Cedar Hill, it marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt them forever. With Lily Stevens's death officially ruled a homicide, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detectives faced the daunting task of finding out who would want to harm a woman so widely loved, and why. But as they began to dig, the peaceful image of Cedar Hill started to fracture, revealing cracks no one had ever seen before. The first person detectives turned to was Lily's younger brother, Daniel. As her closest relative, he was devastated, but police protocol demanded scrutiny. Did he stand to inherit her modest estate? Interviews, however, painted Daniel as heartbroken, cooperative, and utterly unprepared for such accusations. His alibi checked out. He was logged into his office computer miles away at the time of her death. Attention then turned to the neighbors. On such a quiet cul-de-sac, investigators believed someone must have seen or heard something. A next-door neighbor, Mr. Whitaker, reported hearing a faint thud around 9:20 p.m., but dismissed it as the wind. Another resident, a teenage boy, told police he saw a tall man walking near Lily's home that night, though details were vague. Descriptions didn't match anyone familiar to the community. Still, a possible outsider entering Cedar Hill unsettled investigators and residents alike. Some detectives wondered if the murder was random, a break-in gone wrong. But the lack of stolen items contradicted that theory. Others speculated about a stalker, someone quietly watching Lily, waiting for the moment to strike. And then there was the note in her nightstand, a message that hinted she may have known her killer. The first major red herring came when police discovered Lily had recently reconnected with a former colleague, a man named Charles Monroe. Co-workers recalled whispers of an old romance decades earlier, though both had moved on with their lives. Charles admitted they had spoken by phone just days before her death. Rumors swirled. Was this a rekindled love affair gone wrong? Did jealousy play a role? But Charles had a rock-solid alibi. He was attending his granddaughter's recital across town, supported by video footage and dozens of witnesses. Another twist came from Lily's closest friend, Margaret. During questioning, she revealed that Lily had complained about strange phone calls in the weeks leading up to her death. Calls that came late at night, with silence on the other end. Yet, oddly, Lily never reported them. Phone records later showed multiple untraceable calls to her landline from blocked numbers. Was this harassment connected to her murder? Then, there were contradictions. A neighbor initially claimed to have seen Lily watering her garden at dusk, but later retracted, saying she wasn't certain of the day. Another insisted a dark-colored sedan was parked near Lily's home, though no one else recalled it. These inconsistencies slowed investigators, raising frustration both in the department and in the public. By week 2, media descended on Cedar Hill. Headlines screamed, "Beloved teacher murdered in her sleep," amplifying the town's fear. Journalists swarmed the street, cameras flashing, neighbors whispering about motives and suspects. Under the glare of national coverage, police faced mounting pressure to solve the case. Every detail was scrutinized, every delay criticized. In the rush, mistakes were made. A set of footprints leading away from Lily's backyard were left uncovered during rain, washing away potential evidence. And an early fingerprint lifted from the kitchen was mishandled, blurred beyond analysis. The community's grief turned into anger. Candlelight vigils were held, but behind the prayers was a growing demand for justice. Then, weeks into the investigation, came a break that shifted everything. A forensic re-examination of Lily's bedroom revealed a fragment of DNA beneath her fingernail, faint, almost missed the first time. It suggested that, despite the absence of defensive wounds, Lily may have grasped her attacker in a final, desperate moment. The sample was partial, not enough for a full profile, but enough to suggest the killer was male. And just as investigators wrestled with this revelation, a mysterious call came into the police tip line. A distorted voice, low and deliberate, claimed, "You're looking in the wrong place." The call was traced to a prepaid phone, purchased at a gas station on the outskirts of town. It was a message as chilling as it was vague, but it reignited the case in ways no one expected. At this point in the investigation, suspicion was everywhere: neighbors, friends, even those Lily trusted most. But with the DNA discovery and that chilling phone call, the story took a darker turn. Who do you think was responsible? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and stay with us as we unravel the shocking revelations yet to come. For weeks, the investigation into Lily Stevens's murder moved in circles, endless suspects, contradictory accounts, and mounting public pressure. But then came the turning point, a discovery that would unravel the mystery piece by piece, leading investigators straight to the truth. It began in the lab. The partial DNA recovered from beneath Lily's fingernail was reanalyzed using advanced sequencing. Though incomplete, it narrowed down potential matches in a state database. And then, a hit. The DNA showed strong alignment with a man named Thomas Whitaker, the very neighbor who had reported hearing a thud on the night of the murder. At first, police were stunned. Whitaker, a longtime resident of Cedar Hill, was considered reliable. He had spoken openly to detectives, even attended the vigil for Lily. But when questioned again, his story began to crack. First, he insisted he had gone to bed at 9 p.m. sharp. Yet phone records placed him awake, making multiple calls after 9:30. Confronted with this, Whitaker hesitated, fumbling for answers. Detectives dug into Whitaker's background and unearthed details that painted a far darker picture. Whitaker had once been a handyman in town, including at Lily's house. He knew the layout intimately, had spare keys, and had been seen loitering near her home in recent weeks. More troubling was the revelation of a dispute. Neighbors revealed Lily had recently accused him of overcharging her for repair work. A heated argument had followed, one loud enough for passers-by to overhear. Police now theorized that resentment, mixed with something more personal, had fueled Whitaker's actions. The timeline fell into place. Investigators believed Whitaker entered Lily's home under the guise of familiarity, perhaps while she was unpacking groceries. A confrontation escalated. Lily, startled and confused, may have confronted him in her bedroom. In that moment, a single deadly strike ended her life. And the cryptic note in Lily's nightstand? Prosecutors would later argue it reflected her growing fear of someone close, someone like Whitaker, whose behavior had unsettled her for weeks. The trial began months later, and Cedar Hill packed into the courthouse. The prosecution laid out their case: the DNA beneath Lily's fingernail, the suspicious timeline, the heated dispute, and the access Whitaker had to her home. Piece by piece, the evidence tightened around him. But the defense fought back. They claimed the DNA was contamination, that Whitaker had done handyman work at the home, which could explain his presence. They painted him as a scapegoat, targeted by investigators desperate for a conviction under media scrutiny. The tension was palpable. Witnesses were called. Margaret tearfully recounted Lily's unease over late-night calls. Daniel, voice cracking, told the jury his sister had grown fearful but refused to admit it aloud. And the medical examiner detailed, with clinical precision, how quickly Lily's final moments had unfolded. Whitaker himself took the stand, denying involvement. He swore he had nothing but respect for Lily, insisting the argument was minor, resolved long ago. Yet under cross-examination, his composure faltered. Asked why he had lied about the timing of his phone calls, he had no answer. Asked how his DNA ended beneath Lily's fingernail, his silence spoke louder than any words. After weeks of testimony, the case came down to the jury. Hours stretched into days as deliberations continued, tension mounting inside and outside the courthouse. The community waited, holding its breath. Reporters filled the steps, cameras ready. And then, on a gray autumn afternoon, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreperson stood, verdict slip in hand. Gasps echoed through the room as the judge prepared to read it aloud. But what would it be? Guilty, or not guilty? The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read aloud. After days of tense deliberation, the jury had reached a decision. Thomas Whitaker was found guilty of the murder of Lily Stevens. Gasps rippled through the gallery, tears welled in the eyes of Lily's loved ones, and for the first time in weeks, Cedar Hill had an answer, but not closure. Whitaker was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, stern and unflinching, described the crime as a betrayal of trust that shook the foundations of this community. For Daniel Stevens, Lily's brother, the words were a hollow victory. He later told reporters, "No sentence brings my sister back. Justice doesn't fill the empty chair at the table." Margaret Collins, Lily's best friend, wept openly in court. She clutched a framed photo of Lily, whispering, "She didn't deserve this. She was good to everyone." For the town of Cedar Hill, the verdict marked both an end and a beginning, the end of uncertainty, but the beginning of a long process of healing from a wound that ran deep. In the weeks that followed, Cedar Hill was never quite the same. Residents who once left doors unlocked began installing security systems. Vigils turned into memorial scholarships, with Lily's former school establishing the Stevens Foundation to honor her decades of teaching. For the children she once taught, the tragedy became a lesson in both grief and resilience. Yet scars lingered. Some neighbors confessed they no longer trusted those living just across the street. Others struggled with guilt, asking themselves if they should have noticed Whitaker's odd behavior sooner, or if Lily's warnings could have been taken more seriously. The case also sparked statewide conversations. Critics pointed to the police department's early missteps, the washed-away footprints, the mishandled fingerprint, as evidence of a system underprepared for serious crime in small towns. In response, Maryland lawmakers introduced reforms mandating stricter evidence preservation protocols for all law enforcement agencies, regardless of size. Training programs were expanded, ensuring that no detail, however small, would be overlooked again. The media coverage also left its mark. For weeks, the nation had watched Cedar Hill unravel, and the story of Lily Stevens became a cautionary tale about vulnerability, trust, and the hidden dangers that can lurk even in the quietest of places. And yet, even with a conviction, unanswered questions haunted many. Who made those late-night phone calls to Lily's landline? Records showed they couldn't be tied directly to Whitaker. Was he working alone, or had someone else been involved? And why had Lily written that chilling note, warning that if something happened, it wouldn't be an accident? To this day, some argue it suggested a deeper threat, one never fully uncovered. Conspiracy theories circulated in online forums, some claiming Whitaker was a scapegoat, others suggesting Lily had stumbled upon something larger. But for investigators, the official case was closed. The files marked, resolved, convicted. Still, for those who knew her best, closure remained elusive. At Lily's funeral, hundreds gathered, lining the small church where she had once sung in the choir. Former students, now adults, carried flowers to her grave. One, speaking to the crowd, said simply, "She taught me how to believe in myself. I just wish someone had been there to protect her." For Cedar Hill, the murder of Lily Stevens was not just another crime. It was a rupture in the illusion of safety, a reminder that evil can wear familiar faces, and that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we trust most. Years later, her story still lingers in whispered conversations, a wound etched deep in the memory of a town that will never forget. The story of Lily Stevens began as the tale of a beloved teacher in a quiet town, and ended in a way Cedar Hill will never forget. From the unanswered phone calls, to the eerie silence inside her home, to the shocking discovery of her body, every step unraveled a nightmare that few could have imagined. A trusted neighbor became the focus, a community's innocence was stripped away, and a courtroom echoed with grief and anger until a verdict was delivered. But even with a conviction, shadows remain. The unexplained phone calls. The cryptic note Lily left behind. The lingering doubt that perhaps the whole truth never came to light. For her family and neighbors, the question isn't just about what happened that night, it's whether justice truly found its mark. Because even today, the question remains, was justice truly served, or does a killer still walk free?